the U.S. is facing rising consumer prices and supply chain problems. Americans are seeing increasing costs for food, energy, and housing. The global supply chain is struggling to recover from the pandemic. As we approach the holiday shopping season, stores are running short on products, and companies are paying higher prices to manufacture goods. Consumers are eating that cost, paying higher prices at gas pumps and in grocery stores, and there appears to be a consensus.
This morning, Cyber Monday sales on track to meet expectations, with shoppers spending up to an estimated $11 billion.
New data from overseas shows imports into the U.S. are down since the tariff war started, while exports to other countries are quickly climbing.
This means major powers such as China and India are finding other markets for their products. Madeline Rivera has more from Washington.
The stage was set in New York. The United Nations General Assembly, that grand theater of global diplomacy, had seen its share of speeches, some inspiring, some forgettable, some remembered for all the wrong reasons. When Donald Trump walked up the steps to the podium, cameras clicked in a frenzy, world leaders leaned back in their chairs, and the familiar tension filled the air. Everyone knew what was coming. Everyone had learned by then that Trump did not appear at the UN to blend into the background. He came to perform. The teleprompter glowed in front of him. His voice carried through the great chamber with that distinctive mix of confidence and showmanship, half salesman, half statesman. America will never again be at the mercy of foreign powers, he declared, pausing for dramatic effect, allowing the words to sink in, to echo not just in the hall but through the news cycle, through the endless churn of headlines and clips that would loop for days to come. It was a performance tailored for sound bites, strong, defiant, meant to send a message. America was done being pushed around. But there was an irony hiding in the shadows of that moment. Even as Trump declared independence, the machinery of his own administration was working behind the scenes on something very different. While the president painted a picture of a self-reliant nation, White House staff, trade representatives, and industry lobbyists were negotiating carve-outs, rolling back tariffs, and quietly admitting what his words denied, that the United States, far from standing on its own, remained deeply dependent on imports. This is the contradiction at the heart of Trump's trade spectacle. A presidency built on the theater of strength found itself shackled by the realities of supply chains. Tariffs that were supposed to punish rivals and protect American workers ended up exposing vulnerabilities, pushing up costs, and forcing the administration to retreat piece by piece, industry by industry. It is this contradiction that matters, not just as a policy misstep, but as a lesson in how political theater can collide with industrial reality. Because while speeches capture headlines, it is the exemptions quietly signed into executive orders, the emergency waivers filed in the Federal Register, the backroom deals struck with corporations. That is where the real story unfolds. Tariffs were meant to be simple. Trump had campaigned on the promise of using them like a weapon, a blunt instrument to bend other nations to America's will. Raise the cost of Chinese steel, and U.S. steel mills would roar back to life. Tax imported autos, and Detroit would rise again. Punish foreign pharmaceuticals and American labs would boom. The slogans were simple, the imagery powerful, factories reopening, workers returning, the industrial heartland reborn. But economies are not slogans. They are networks. And when those networks are global, when raw materials are mined on one continent, processed on another, shipped through multiple ports before arriving in assembly lines scattered across the world, the idea of self-reliance becomes less a policy and more a fantasy. Tariffs could raise prices, yes. They could disrupt trade flows, yes. But they could not erase decades of interdependence built into the structure of the global economy. And so the unraveling began almost as soon as the tariffs were announced. Steel tariffs provoked immediate backlash from allies. Canada and the European Union warned of retaliation. Manufacturers in the US complained of rising costs. Automakers warned that the price of an average car would rise by hundreds of dollars, pricing out consumers and reducing sales. The administration responded with exemptions. First, Canada and Mexico were carved out of certain tariffs, though even that changed over time, swinging back and forth as NAFTA was renegotiated into the USMCA. Then came the sectoral carve-outs, specific industries, specific minerals, specific pharmaceuticals. Graphite, crucial for batteries, was quietly exempted because without it, the electric vehicle sector, already fragile, would falter. Nickel, needed for both steel alloys and batteries, was pulled back from the tariff line. Pharmaceuticals were too sensitive to touch. The risk of disrupting drug supplies, of sparking shortages in hospitals and pharmacies, was too great. Each exemption told a story. It told us where the United States was vulnerable, where the slogans of independence clashed with the reality of dependence. Each exemption was a confession. We cannot cut ourselves off. Not here, not now. Graphite is the perfect example. On paper, it seems like just another mineral, one of many pulled from the ground and processed into usable form. But in practice, it is the backbone of the battery revolution, the key component in lithium-ion batteries that power everything from smartphones to laptops to electric cars. The United States does not dominate this industry. China does. Nearly 90% of global graphite processing takes place in Chinese plants. Without Chinese graphite, the supply chain breaks. So when tariffs were announced on Chinese imports, graphite was listed. But soon after, lobbyists for automakers, electronics companies, and renewable energy firms began warning the administration this could cripple us. And within months, graphite was carved out. A silent admission that no matter how bold the rhetoric, America could not walk away from Chinese minerals. Nickel told a similar story. Essential for stainless steel, essential for batteries, it flows into countless products. The global supply is dominated by a handful of countries, with processing concentrated outside the US. Tariffs risked disrupting too much, so exemptions came. And pharmaceuticals, arguably the most politically sensitive exemption of all. The rhetoric of America first collided with the reality that the pills in American medicine cabinets, the antibiotics in hospitals, the treatments in pharmacies, depend on supply chains stretching to China and India. The administration could not risk shortages, so the tariffs were rolled back. This pattern repeated again and again, sweeping declarations followed by quiet retreats. The president on stage declaring strength, while his administration quietly acknowledged weakness. The auto industry became the clearest window into this contradiction. Automobiles are not a single product. They are an assembly of tens of thousands of parts, each sourced through complex supply chains that cross borders multiple times before a car rolls off the line. Tariffs on metals raised input costs immediately. An extra $100 here for steel, another $100 for aluminum, multiplied across millions of vehicles, became billions in added costs. Automakers faced a choice: absorb the costs and shrink their margins, or pass them on to consumers and risk reduced sales. Neither option was attractive. They warned the administration. Industry groups presented studies showing that tariffs could add as much as $2,000 to the price of an average car. Executives testified before Congress. Workers at plants in Michigan and Ohio began worrying about reduced shifts. Yet the White House pressed forward, unwilling to abandon the spectacle of toughness. The results were predictable. Car prices inched upward, sales slowed, plants cut back hours, consumers grumbled. The spectacle of tariffs became the lived experience of higher costs. And this is where the story of Trump's trade war shifts from policy to geopolitics. Because while America was tripping over its own contradictions, rivals were tightening their grip. China saw opportunity. Already dominant in battery minerals, already central to global supply chains, it reinforced its position. Russia, sanctioned and isolated by the West, deepened its partnerships with Beijing. Nickel from Russian mines, graphite from Chinese plants, rare earths from across Asia. These flowed into supply chains that America could not disentangle itself from. Allies watched with unease. European manufacturers worried that America's erratic tariff policies would destabilize markets. Asian partners wondered whether Washington's talk of resilience was just that, talk. The reliability of the United States as a trade partner, as a global economic leader, was questioned. And through it all, ordinary Americans bore the costs. Shoppers in California paid more for groceries and electronics. Workers in Michigan saw their hours cut. Farmers, caught in the crossfire of retaliatory tariffs, struggled to sell their crops abroad. Executives admitted quietly that the dream of self-sufficiency was impossible. The deeper story here is not just about tariffs. It is about spectacle versus strategy, about the difference between political theater and economic reality. The theater was powerful: presidential speeches, bold declarations, promises of revival. But the strategy was absent. Tariffs were not backed by industrial policy, not matched with investment in domestic processing of minerals, not supported by coordinated efforts to build resilient supply chains. They were, in the end, slogans backed by paperwork. And slogans cannot hold up factories. They cannot mine graphite or refine nickel. They cannot replace pharmaceutical supply chains built over decades. The United States faced a choice in those years to confront the structural dependencies of its economy with long-term investment, or to paper over them with short-term spectacle. The choice made was spectacle. Trump's trade war began with fireworks, but it collapsed with carve-outs. It's one of the most revealing contradictions of modern U.S. politics. The louder the rhetoric, the quieter the retreat. After months of speeches promising ironclad protection for American industries, executive orders slipped exemptions into the fine print. Nickel was too important to keep out. Graphite was too critical to electric vehicle batteries. Pharmaceutical imports couldn't simply be walled off because U.S. hospitals depend on overseas active ingredients. The theater of tariffs gave the image of strength, but the substance of survival was imports. And that's the final contradiction of Trump's tariff spectacle. The show was strength, but the substance was survival through imports. The slogans promised independence, yet the carve-outs told the truth: America cannot escape the web of global supply chains. When politics turns into theater, it's not rivals abroad who pay the first price. It's workers, consumers, and families at home. That is the lesson of this trade war, and the warning for what comes next. This is Traveling Vibes. If you found this deep dive sharp and eye-opening, don't forget to subscribe, leave your thoughts in the comments, and share this video with others who want context behind the headlines. Because here, we cut past the spectacle to uncover the strategy, or the lack of it, that shapes our world.